Support for this podcast is provided by Paradox, the conversational AI company helping global talent acquisition teams at Unilever, McDonald's, and CVS Health get recruiting work done faster. Let's face it, talent acquisition is full of boring administrative tasks that drag the hiring process down and create frustrating experiences for everyone. Paradox's AI assistant, Olivia, is shaking up that paradigm, automating things like applicant screening, interview scheduling, and candidate Q&A, so recruiters can spend more time with people, not software. Curious how Olivia can work for your team? Then visit paradox.ai to learn more.
There's been more of scientific discovery, more of technical advancement and material progress in your lifetime and mine than in all the ages of history.
Hi there, this is Matt Alder. Welcome to episode 513 of the Recruiting Future podcast. One of the biggest challenges of remote and hybrid working is the lack of face-to-face connection that humans need to be fully engaged and productive. This is always one of the main arguments for employers attempting to return their workers to the office. However, the advantages of remote and hybrid working are considerable, and forcing people to work 5 days a week back in an office isn't necessarily the best way of dealing with the challenges. So, what can employers do to foster a sense of connection, belonging, and engagement, and provide the scaffolding for high-performing teams? My guest this week is Sophie Bailey, co-founder and CEO of Worktripp. Worktripp is an Airbnb for business offsites, and Sophie has some hugely valuable insights to share on supercharging connection, creativity, and culture. Hi, Sophie, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Matt. It's great to be here.
An absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Please, could you introduce yourself and tell everyone what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Sophie Bailey, and I'm the co-founder of Worktripp. And what I do, so Worktripp is an Airbnb for team offsites to supercharge connection, creativity, and culture in our new world of work. So what does that all mean? Well, our vision is to help all teams to get together, enjoy work, and be productive. And our mission is to right the balance from what we see as the sort of pure hyper efficiency of this new world of work to providing the scaffolding and the conditions for high performing teams. So many of those things that your listeners will have heard about. So psychological safety, trust, motivation, and engagement. So yeah, that's a little bit about me, and absolutely brilliant to be here.
Well, fantastic. And so many topics to explore there. Before we kind of dive in, let's sort of get back to the basics of all of this. So we've had 3 amazing, unprecedented years where the way that lots of people work have changed. You know, lots of people working remotely, lots of people working hybrid. Why is person-to-person, face-to-face human connection so important when it comes to work?
Yeah, I mean, I love that you talked about that sort of mainstream shift now to hybrid. And we know from, whether it's recruiting platforms or other data that, we are really settling into that hybrid mode. So I definitely think we still haven't sort of got the panacea of how we're going to work, but there is a definite appetite for this autonomy and connection that people want. And that's something that is fantastic in so many ways. So, I've benefited myself from working remotely for over 7 years, and it's allowed me to live where I want and to, do all those things that I sort of the richness of life is far greater as a result. But for companies and teams, when that experiment is sort of rolled out at scale, there are some challenges. And so I think there's a really brilliant opportunity now to kind of think about how we reinvent how we work so that it allows for all of those benefits, but also, smooths off some of the rough edges of remote work as well. So to go back to your question, why is it important sort of face to face and to really nurture human connection? it really comes down to this problem of disengagement. So, disengagement has always been a problem at work, but in this kind of new world of work, this is really sort of now quite an acute issue. So, to put this into financial terms, this is hurting businesses and teams to the tune of nearly $8 trillion US. And this is through absenteeism, staff turnover, and poor innovation. And for any of your listeners that have delved into the Gallup State of the Global Workplace report, the latest one was in 2022, it's pretty damning reading. So disengaged employees have a 37% increased rate of absenteeism. Those who have this greater absenteeism have 15% lower profitability, and the average cost per employee is around $2,200. And if you extrapolate that to a team of 250, disengaged employees are costing over $500,000. So this basically doesn't even account for the kind of human cost of that sort of stress, lack of belonging, could be depression, and definitely is loneliness. So we know there's a loneliness endemic at work, and in the UK we have the All Parliamentary Party Group working on exactly that. And all of this adds up to a not great situation for teams, for innovation, for our sort of collective human endeavour, and for our businesses as well.
So the issues you described have sort of been, described extensively in the media. They're in a lot of the conversations that we're having, and they're being used by some businesses and some managers as a reason why everyone just needs to get back to the office and pretend the last 3 years hasn't happened and get work back to where it used to be. Obviously, if you do that, then you're losing all of the benefits that we talked about right at the beginning. So there has to be another way. There has to be another way of looking at this issue. How can we make that human face-to-face connection happen while kind of remaining hybrid and remote without having to get everyone back to the office and rewind and pretend it's still 2019?
Definitely. And, I think we get very excited about this sort of third way and not falling into this sort of dichotomy of office first or remote first, which, whenever you kind of simplify things to that level, there's usually the alarm bell should go off. And so we think, there is this mix. And also the reality is that, the complexity of teams, the complexity of the people that make up those teams means that you're never going to settle into this one mode, and it will always be a mix and a spectrum, and kind of finding that sweet spot as a result. My answer before was all the bad stuff. I guess if we go back to that human connection and what's positive, that, we know human connection really matters, and we can do some of this stuff remotely, and that's fantastic and very productive. But where possible, sort of face-to-face really dials up certain elements of our kind of working lives. So for us, this is providing sort of both the physical space, but also the sort of the space and the calendar for sort of deep engagement. So like I talked about, remote is amazing at cutting out all of the sort of wasted time of meetings that you don't need to be in, of commuting. But it can be quite individualistic. So you're sort of working through your tasks, and it's harder to have that kind of spontaneous sort of group, very fast paced back to back sort of ideation stuff. And so for us, we want to try and help teams to create that sort of scaffolding that provides space for the longer term thinking, is perhaps more based around nurturing team performance. And we know this really matters. So, there was a recent McKinsey report, not for want of, overusing McKinsey as a kind of reference point, but it was really interesting because it was all around psychological safety. And their point in this recent report was that, teams generally don't do enough work on psychological safety, even though we know it's sort of precursor to team success. And for them, there's this really interesting quote where they say, invest in leadership development experiences that are emotional, sensory, and create aha moments. And learning experiences that are immersive and engaging are remembered more clearly and for a longer time. So there's this element of when you can bring people together and you do it in a very memorable way. So not a boring hotel room down the road from the office, but in a really considered way and really thinking about the needs specifically of your team, that you can create the sort of underpinnings of success in the longer term, and especially when everyone's then distributed again. The second point is really around creative ideation. So there was a Stanford experiment by a bunch of researchers, and they found that in-person teams generated about 15% more ideas than virtual teams. And so for creative collaboration and ideation, being together is really important. And the point is that, offices are great, but for the most part, they're not necessarily that space where, we're really allowing for a different set of thinking. Too often people go back to the office and it's like, plug in and crack on with some more Zoom calls or Teams calls. And so our whole thing is about encouraging people to think about why they're getting together, and then B, where they're getting together and with which specialist support as well. So that's a little bit about, potentially for us, it's not one or the other. It's, working in the best of online, the best of remote, but also then when you're getting together, make the most of your natural environment, make the most of the fact that you can think in a different mode than that kind of like reactive and very task driven way of doing things as well.
So which companies do this well, and what is it that they do?
Yeah, I mean, well, unsurprisingly is that there's this sort of suits like the big tech companies or scale ups quite well. So in terms of household names, one of our advisors, Q Hamirani, he is the person that basically came up with Airbnb's work from anywhere policy. And a crucial part of that policy was meeting quarterly. So, have a very flexible way of working, but come together quarterly to kind of really nurture that in-person connection. And, that policy was hugely popular. I think 800,000 people looked at the recruitment page when it went up. An alternative version of that was when Salesforce talked about, they put a whole load of money into the Salesforce Ranch, which was this like beautiful campus to bring everyone together, and then again, like work flexibly. Dropbox, there's a really interesting article about how they were using offsites to increase the retention of their top talent, and that's been very successful. And then another one that people probably have seen doing the rounds on LinkedIn is Shopify. So they talked about, cancelling all meetings over a certain number of people being involved in them, really reducing the meetings, and then they use offsites again to kind of drive the trust element that sort of oils the wheels of, if you're working in a remote way, you kind of then need to build that sense of different personalities and what motivates people and all of those kind of things. I mean, outside of those names, I think sector-wise, we're chatting to lots of companies in the fintech sector, because a lot of those companies are really high growth. They tend to work either in a hybrid or fully remote way, and they're kind of meeting quarterly to sort of keep that company culture and engagement together as the company scales. And then just very quickly, NGOs, so philanthropic organizations, this has been part of the fabric of how they work for a long time. So they are very well versed in using offsites to convene their stakeholders. So what we hope to do with that sector is just to help them continue to find really brilliant facilitators and coaches and memorable venues, and keep that kind of fresh and engaging as well.
That's really, really interesting stuff, and very interested to hear how the offsite meetings are evolving, because back when I had a proper job, which was quite some time ago, my experiences of offsite was very mixed. Either we went to a hotel, we were in a meeting room with no windows, and it just meant we could start earlier and stay later because we were all staying in the same building, or if something was a bit more structured, that, doing crazy things like, climbing up ropes and cliffs and outdoor pursuits, which never really kind of connected to what we were, what we were kind of thinking about. So, I think that, many companies have sort of done these in the past and perhaps not got the full benefit out of them. What makes for a good offsite? What are the key elements, and what would your advice be to companies to do this successfully?
Yeah, exactly. So, this is kind of why I set up Worktripp, to be honest. So my background, the first 10 years of my career was in conceiving and delivering business to business technology events. So understanding the needs of those different sectors and then creating these experiences around the world. And through that, I saw what was brilliant about convening people, usually when it was quite imaginatively done, and when it was exactly what you just described, which is this sort of sad strata of business person traveling around the world. They could literally be anywhere because the conference hotels that generally are chosen are quite generic. And in this new world of work where employee engagement and branding and positioning of companies is so crucial because it's so easy to switch jobs, that doesn't cut it anymore. So that's the first thing, is just, that experience just isn't good enough. The next 7 years of my career I dedicated to educational technology and understanding kind of the innovation that's happening in education, how we learn. And that's kind of like gone from pure optimization through technology, so learning more and more content, how do we do that, to a greater sophisticated understanding of us as humans and our intrinsic motivations and how we learn and what our limiting factors are and things like that. And I think those two things combined, was the driver behind Worktripp. And so for me, I'm passionate that offsites aren't just about booking a box and filling it with people. It's not just about aligning the budget and a logistics problem. It should absolutely be about, nurturing in a very mindful way the talent in our organizations and providing them the environment that they can connect with one another, that they can learn, that they have this proximity to leadership, and that this is now like a kind of business critical thing. And when I looked at the market and the experience, it was exactly what you described, like very woefully underserved. So the worst excesses of that being, hen and stag do websites with a little corporate tag. And because of the kind of critical nature of us connecting as teams now, and we know that, our problems that we're trying to solve are very interconnected. So developing, the kind of different disciplines of teams is super important, ever more so. So that's the kind of driver behind it. What makes for a good offsite? Well, one is, as you would have heard people talking about why you're going back into the office, really start with the intention. What is the purpose of bringing everyone together? Is it just about connection, or is it about, creative ideation? Is it about getting marketing and the product team to work better together? Like, really think about what is the purpose. That leads me into, too often we know we need to do these things, but again, we're sort of like, oh, it's in a month, right, we better do something. So thinking longer term and thinking about it as a sort of flow of work, in and out of this in-person mode, and then, back at your desk, and how do those two things work together? So quarterly, if you were to craft what those touch points were over the year, what does that look like? And as a result, like, which external expertise, be that, an executive coach or a facilitator, a workshop or a speaker, do you want to bring in to really develop those connections between and across your teams? So thinking about it more than a one-off event, as into a kind of scheme of work over the whole year. I've talked about not starting with logistics, because that's the temptation, is like, we've got a logistical problem, let's book a venue. And then we're very passionate about environment. So we have this campaign against boring venues, and we're very passionate about the environment that teams choose. And we, in our platform, all of the venues that we put forward are pretty much in a natural environment. That doesn't mean they're not convenient. They're quite often close to a city hub, but actually you remove the temptation to think about going back home, going to the office, and actually it's about like really being there and sort of underpinning that connection time as well. And then just really quickly, and I think most of your listeners will know this, do not overpack the program. So going back to your point of, either it being, like so scripted that you feel you do not want your employees to feel held captive. So it's about having options, and it's about recognizing the different adventurousness on your team, and perhaps having some options which are about self-development, or some options which are about like having being able to connect with your team, doing different experiences, but not mandating all the time, and allowing some just free time for people to really pick that up. Yeah. So, I mean, one thing that came up in our research last year was that, the typical mode would be a COO sort of droning on to everyone and doing lots of workshops, and then basically everyone getting drunk. And, one of the trends that we know about is that our younger people in the workforce, they really are hungry for self-development. They perhaps went to university, doing a lot of that learning online, and then went straight into the workplace in a remote mode. And they don't have necessarily all those kind of social proximity to leadership moments that we had. So creating and thinking about, healthy food, options for self-development, and kind of like a changing appetite for what's included in offsites is quite important as well.
So much of that resonates. And I think the thing that's particularly interesting for me is the kind of the relation for humans to their environment, and how that shapes and drives behavior. Because I'm guessing if people are in a faceless, a windowless conference room that looks a bit like an office, they're going to be answering their phone and behaving pretty much like they would in an office or doing their work. But actually, a different environment creates that sort of different behavior and unlocks different types of thinking, I suppose.
100%. I mean, there's so much research about, for example, our ability to come up with creative solutions after walking is like hugely improved. And, it won't be a surprise to anyone listening to this about the effect of natural light on productivity, on well-being, and our interrelations with other people. So those are things that we take really seriously when we're thinking about what kind of environments that we would offer up in Worktripp. And yeah, it's exactly that. And we have this unique opportunity to kind of reinvent that. So let's absolutely do that. And actually the research is there to show that there are huge benefits. So, there's someone, Gary Pratt is one of our listings, and he talks about, being out and in nature and walking is sort of like a very cost-effective way of coming up with lots of great new ideas, So it doesn't always have to be super expensive as well, as the other thing.
So, final question. What do you think the future of work now looks like? How are hybrid and remote and all the things we do, how's it all going to evolve?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting question, and obviously something that we think about a lot. I really like, and I don't know if you've seen, but IDC's view on the future of work. So there's lots of things flying around out there, but they talk about the future of work as fostering human-machine collaboration, so enabling new skills and worker experiences, and supporting a reimagined physical workplace and borderless digital workspace. And they talk about these three pillars being augmentation, culture, and space. And interestingly, space accounts for 60%, as they see it, of all future of work spending. And so my view on this, having listened to like over 250 and recorded and edited 250 episodes of the EdTech podcast, and listened to people in this space, and is very much that, automation is here, it's coming, and it will influence our working lives ever more. And my view is that the most influential and high growth companies will channel that automation, especially for very repetitive, task-driven activities. But as a result, they'll hugely invest and recognize the kind of increasing sort of value of human creativity, collaboration, and social capital. So, there's no point, in my view, us trying to replicate and keep up with computing power. Like, let's just park that one, because it's just like we're never going to compete in that level. But what we can do is like use that to save us time, and actually use that time to kind of really hone our true human creativity. And the other thing that I think we'll see is a sort of continued unbundling of the traditional workplace. So I think there will be a continued weakening of the tie between employer and employee. So we know we're all going to live older. We're probably going to have a greater element of this portfolio career. And, I think freelancers are one of the fastest growing employee base in Europe. And I think that's super interesting. And again, hopefully allows us to kind of tap into the things that we really want to achieve in life, rather than, feeling that we have to be tied to one employer. And just finally, so you asked about the future of work. So we kind of talk about the future of teams at Worktripp. So again, the idea here is that, the world is facing these so-called wicked problems, and they're very interconnected. So whether that's the environment or, again, sort of automation, all these different things, they're very interconnected and complex. And as a result, we need to be mindful that when we're developing our workplace cultures, that they aren't just channeling this kind of task-driven, individualistic approach, that they're also nurturing our ability as teams and our ability to kind of bring different problem solvers together. And so that's kind of, again, why we're really passionate about trying to create a sort of scaffolding for that to work well, and which isn't 100% office first, isn't 100% purely remote, but is sort of brings those two elements together in a kind of new form. So yeah, it's an exciting space. And, I think I'm excited I've got an 8-year-old and a 2-year-old. And I think actually, like, what a great opportunity, hopefully, they're going to have to work in a different way and to make the most of their time. So feeling optimistic about it all.
Sophie, thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Matt.
My thanks to Sophie. I'm very excited about attending Unleash at Caesars Forum in Vegas on the 25th through to the 27th of April. Please come and say hello if you're there, and I'm going to be doing some podcasting from the expo floor. If you haven't yet got your ticket, if you go to unleash.ai/unleashamerica, you can use the discount code recruitingfuture20 ATT-SH. That's recruitingfuture 20 ATT-SH to get a 20% discount. You can subscribe to this podcast in Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, or via your podcasting app of choice. Please also follow the show on Instagram. You can find us by searching for Recruiting Future. You can search all the past episodes at recruitingfuture.com. On that site, you can also subscribe to our monthly newsletter, Recruiting Future Feast, and get the inside track about everything that's coming up on the show. Thanks very much for listening. I'll be back next time, and I hope you'll join me.
This is my show.